And welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report. And we have on the program today our Zymogen, our Nutrimedical team. And Clay, Nutrimedical has the most advanced nutraceuticals in the world. And I think what people should understand is when we put our protocols together, we have ways of validating if with medical tests, conventional and advanced medical testing, bioplasmatic testing like the QRMA, and a bioplasm, and we're able to then validate that we have improvement. And I get consults literally 7 days a week, email or phone calls. The email ones, by the way, anybody can email me. There's no fee for doing an email and getting a response to tell them the top things to start with. And phone calls, we only return those to our regular customers that have ordered 6 times in the last year, even if it's only one bottle, or they've ordered a $1,000 order. Anybody can order a consult. So, Clay, I want you to pick out a couple of the top Nutrimed programs and nutraceuticals, and then we'll kind of expand on those as to how they can be applied, because they're often applied in multiple conditions, aren't they?
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, one I like is something that most of your listeners can relate to and use on a daily basis is something for digestion. You know, so many people have, a stomach ache after they eat, or they get bloating or gas or belching, things of these things, pain. And, people just think, I just got to live with that. Well, that's not the case. That's why I really like the Gastrozyme. Gastrozyme is really unique because not only does it have enzymes in there to help break down proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, but also it has enzymes in there to help break down lactose, right? Milk sugars, dairy, beans, fibers, and gluten. So really, a lot of times you don't know what's in the food you're eating, and you may have some type of reaction to it and not really realize or recognize what you're having a reaction to. And so it's just great to have the Gastrozyme there with you. Take 1 to 2 with each meal, and you'll feel just great after taking it.
Yeah, exactly. Give us a little bit more explanation of that. Why is there such a big problem with deficiencies in stomach acid and pepsin and enzymes, and how would it present? Because a lot of people think it's an older person disease. I've had teenagers with nutritional deficiencies of the digestive enzymes. I think a lot of it is because they're brush border enzymes that are actually just attached and hanging off the brush border of the bowel wall. And when you lose these digestive enzymes that are on the bowel wall, you also lose them in terms of the pancreatic function. If the person has any degree of gut inflammation or allergy or high levels of histamine from food allergy, food sensitivity to certain molecules. So fill me in on that. What's the story?
Yeah, not to mention prescription drugs also can be related to that. A lot of times people just don't have enough sense to chew their food properly or have enough water. I mean, there's all kinds of different reasons. There could be hundreds of different reasons, really. That's also why I recommend that you give the Allergon with the meals, too, especially for people that get very sensitive to all kinds of different types of foods. The Allergon, what that is, it's diamine oxidase, which is an enzyme that the body naturally produces. Well, the body produces this enzyme to help deal with histamine that's found in foods. And so there's all kinds of foods that are high in histamine, things like cured meats and cheeses, different types of beer and wine. These are just some of the more common ones. Tuna fish, they're very high in histamine. And so when you eat these things, a lot of times you'll react to them. You may get a stomach ache, you may get a rash or hives, you may get a runny nose or a headache. There's all kinds of different ways
it can also cross the blood-brain barrier to cause drowsiness or hyperactivity, especially in kids that have ADD or people that have anxiety, depression, where their brain hormones are already out of balance. So levels of histamine, and by the way, histamine is what's called a fulcrum nutraceutical. By fulcrum, it means it can trigger off interleukin-1 beta, TNF-alpha, and other cytokines and cause joint inflammation, brain inflammation. So if you have a child, for example, that has ADD, ADHD, taking digestive enzymes to improve health and reducing the cytokines with Allergon and Allerblock is also a good process, because you're trying to block those cytokines that are triggered off, because 3/4 of your immune system exists in the Kupffer cells of your liver or the Peyer's patches of your gut wall. 3/4. Not even in your skin, it's in your gut wall and in your liver. Isn't that amazing?
Mm-hmm.
And it would make sense. It's at the contact point where food's coming in. It's being broken down and reincorporated as parts of your body. So it kind of makes sense that that would be what's happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's look at the next ones. What's your next?
Well, I know that it's really popular. There's a lot of people over the age of 40 start having issues with their eyesight. And
right.
so, I recommend giving all the foundational nutritional needs that your body can use to help support eye health. And so I really like the Vision Max. And if you go
right.
look at the literature in the medical journals regarding nutritional support for the eyes, all the things I see in the literature are found in the Vision Max product. And, those things are, amino acid chelated zinc, you have taurine, N-acetylcysteine, bilberry extract, lutein, alpha-lipoic acid, quercetin, and lycopene. So really supportive of eye health, something you could take every day.
Right.
A really one-stop shop for that. Really can't recommend any higher.
The other two things that I find, particularly for the eye, are, of course, the Can-C eye drops. And for the inflammation in the eye, I particularly like cell detox glutathione, because it's usually inflammation. A lot of times, actually, it's made worse if someone has a cataract and they have cataract surgery and they don't reduce their eye inflammation with things like the Vision Max and the cell detox glutathione. Their visual deterioration accelerates in terms of macular degeneration or microcirculatory problems. We have other nutraceuticals that help with microcirculation, like cardiovasc and ellagic acid and Vein-Away. Well, that's another one that's very good for the eye, because it's usually the microcirculation. For example, if someone has glaucoma, which is the most common cause of visual loss, I have the rep. Actually, I'm trying to get them on the program to discuss this. But you can actually measure endothelial wall function now with a system called the Vendus system. And what happens is that the intraocular pressure is only a bystander factor. It's not the only factor that's causing the problem. It's tamponading or compressing the blood vessels, but the primary problem is microcirculation. That's why you can have a third of people with glaucoma with normal eye pressures. So as you start to improve eye health with things like Vision Max and cardiovasc and ellagic acid and omega supreme krill and neurogen for remyelination, and particularly cutting down the free radicals with things like Nutritrala, Regenerex, and Cell Detox. And the order I would get is Cell Detox glutathione. Then the next one I would get would be Nutritrala, because very often people with eye disorders have diabetes or prediabetes, and they have insulin resistance and increased cytokine levels. And then Regenerex and then Cell Defense, which is the slow-release curcumin. Curcumin is very powerful, but it's very poorly bioavailable unless you use our special technology with bioperin to increase absorption dramatically. That's one of the problems with curcumin. So, eye disorders.
I was just at the eye doctor, and they did a whole checkup on my eye and showed me different pictures. And the doctor was telling me that on my end everything looked great, but she had mentioned, she said, and she showed me this picture. She goes, I could tell you if you had pre-diabetes or diabetes just by looking at this, in the eye. And I thought, wow, that was fascinating. That she said it was scientifically proven that she could see that. 100% of the time she could tell somebody who would get tested.
Yeah, diabetes is a microcirculatory problem, and it's related to cytokines. In fact, the University of California, San Diego found leukotriene B4 was a primary trigger for increased insulin and leptin resistance. But what triggers off LDB4 is the loss of superoxide dismutase, and the increased insulin resistance, of course, drives the blood sugar up and everything else. So as you take things like, say, 1 capsule a day of selenium cruciferate, you take our dibetaline, Nutritrala, as you take things to stop the free radicals like cell detox glutathione, you stop that free radicals, it actually triggers off all the other things down the cascade. Interesting, eh? I guess that's a long bumper. This is the last day of the 7 for Heaven sale. It'll be over at midnight tonight, so if you want to scramble, either online or call our order line, 888-212-8871. It'll probably be Memorial Day a couple months from now before the next sale occurs. It's about every 2 months. It may usually a big holiday weekend, so let's go over some of the other breakthroughs. What's going on is I'm working closely on a couple of different important papers I'm presenting to the academies this year. And they tie in with our approach to try to repair. For example, I get a lot of requests now. It's the 5th anniversary of Fukushima Daiichi, what to take to protect themselves from the damage due to their thyroid and other glands. And the first thing I'd recommend is a lot of people are already teetering on hypothyroidism. If you actually look at our population in North America, and the best marker for hypothyroidism is low core body temperature and an elevation of reverse thyroid hormone. Because when the body is under stress, it starts to turn things off. Because if you're at full throttle, your adrenal glands can't keep up with your thyroid. And if your thyroid is getting stressed, your adrenal glands get stressed, and you'll see abnormal cortisol output during the day called diurnal patterns. So the first thing I tell people to take is take our Nutrimedical and mitothyroid, and take a selenium cruciferate, and also the minerals to support the thyroid, which are the Minerals Plus and Vitamin Mineral Max, and to take antioxidants to stop oxidative stress to your gland under radiotoxins, and pull the heavy metals out like Keylor Max, and to take antioxidants, things like Nutritrella and Cell Detox, Glutathione, Regenerex, and Cell Defense, which is one of the most amazing nutraceuticals is curcumin, but it's not very bioavailable. We have a technology that makes it bioavailable. And you get really immense dosages. I mean, there are some other forms out now, like of curcumin, but none of them will provide the number of milligrams necessary to have the biological effects that we can generate. So let's talk about radiation. You're damaging primarily your mitochondria, which are 30 times more sensitive. So taking antioxidants is very important. High-dose Power C. In fact, we've now pretty well got proof that cataracts are basically a nascent form of borderline vitamin C deficiency syndrome. Isn't that interesting? And it just came out a report last week proving that actually in medical research news as well. I've known it for years, but when people are saying, well, I'm starting to get an early cataract, well, that means you're vitamin C deficient. Right off. Now, you can add other antioxidants to that, like Nutritrella, Regenerex, Cell Detox, Glutathione, and Carnosine, which stops sugar cross-linking when it's oxidized sugar. Because remember, sugar is a patch that grabs singlet oxygen. Sugar is not the cause of the problem. It's a bystander, and it's also toxic itself, and it's oxidized and by singlet oxygen, which is a 100 million degree, basically molecule, glycosylated molecule that's now been oxidized, will cross-link proteins. So that's interesting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about
that Power C Plus. I mean, that's a fantastic formula.
It is. Tell us about it, because I think a lot of people don't realize how important vitamin C is. Linus Pauling called it liquid electrons. And if you don't have, and you want to alkalinize your body, and this can be proven with a QRMA test or urinary tests or other testing, to look at we call alkalinity of the body, maintaining your body in an alkaline state is very essential to maintaining health.
Yeah, the Power C Plus, it has various different forms of vitamin C in it. Vitamin C isn't just ascorbic acid by itself, but if you just take ascorbic acid in high doses, a lot of times you'll get gastric upset, loose stool, diarrhea. It's unpleasant. But when you take something like the Power C Plus, you have this blend of mineral ascorbates that give you a more neutral pH balanced form of vitamin C as well. So you can take higher doses without getting the gastric upset. And that's the idea, is try to get as much of this into the system as the system will allow.
Part of our protocol for cancer and autoimmune disease is to get people up to 6 to 9 to 12 capsules 3 times a day. Now, they can open the capsules and make a smoothie with it too. And for every 3 Power C, I recommend full vitamin K2, an ellagic acid, and a malignant block. So in other words, if you're taking 9 capsules of Power C, you're going to take 3 each of those, which are going to stimulate apoptosis, cell DNA repair, and program cell death of damaged cells beyond repair. And that's very important, because if you're there's a new test now for cancer that's being developed in Hanford, England, and it takes lymphocytes and exposes them to ultraviolet light, and the amount of damage that can be induced in so many minutes with certain lumen power of ultraviolet light determines whether or not that person is at risk of cancer or has cancer somewhere in their body. So basically, it's the repair mechanisms. If the repair mechanisms are insufficient, you're going to get cancer, and it's going to escape beyond the immune system, because everybody develops cancer cells every day. It's whether they're identified quickly enough, and whether the repair occurs to the DNA, or the cells are able to kind of multiply and stop, coat themselves with fibronectin, and start, metastasizing and doing other things. So, same with autoimmune disease. It's basically the cells start to produce antigens on the cell surface, and the body's immune system doesn't recognize it as self anymore, and it attacks the tissue. Sometimes it's what's called immune homology, where it's similar to the protein sequence on pathogens that are inside the cell or outside the cell that stimulate the immune system, and the immune system trying to clear the pathogen attacks the tissue because there's the same sequence of amino acids that's called immune homology-induced autoimmunity. So taking things like our allicin meds is very important, Nutriodine, Silver 100, and my NutriDefense. But I think that people should start to realize that powered vitamin C is one of the most important universal things everybody should be taking a lot of, your children, yourself, everybody. That even cataracts are just another sign of vitamin C deficiency. Interesting, eh?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And not to mention, it just helps to repair all the collagen in your body as well.
Right.
So just for
exactly, yeah. Yeah, in fact, if you want to build collagen, there's the three things that I tell people right off the bat. Power C+, Collagen Max, which is choline stabilized orthosilicic silicon. It triples the rate of the proline transhydroxylase enzyme. And the other is what we call our royal jelly. And our royal jelly soft gels will create pro-collagen. But then, of course, if you want to modulate the tendons and ligaments, you want Tendon Mender to turn the tendons and ligaments and fibroblasts back to normal. And the joint performance is going to have to rebuild the glycosaminoglycans. You can add to that mountain red velvet, but tendon bender and joint performance, if you've got chronic ligamentous or post-traumatic pain, those are the first things. And then, of course, I recommend both Inflamex and Cell Defense. And, good dosages, 4 to 5 capsules of the Inflamex twice a day to 3 times a day. Cell Defense, 2 caplets 3 times a day. And you'll notice your tissues start to heal. And topically, pregnenolone cream and curcumin cream. And it's liposomal because it's going to penetrate. By the way, for hormone support, it's pregnenolone and DHEA. That's for men and women. And for men, we recommend Men's Max to start with. So, in other words, we mix and match these depending on the condition that we're trying to address. And oftentimes, people have symptoms that cross over because they have an underlying deficiency that creates 2 or 3 different problems in different systems presenting with different complaints. Interesting, eh?
Yeah, very good.
Thank you, Clay. You did a great job. We will talk again next Monday. And back in a moment, we'll be talking with Ryan, our other team member of Team Nutrimedical. And hour number 3 coming up is Lowell Ponte in a major book that I think you're going to find shocking a bit, and you'll find enlightening a lot. Ryan, we've got some amazing nutraceuticals, and I often like to either talk about the protocols or just go backwards and talk about the nutraceuticals and then see how they apply. And some of the nutraceuticals are so amazing because these are medical grade, and a lot of people don't understand what the difference is. If they go to search either online or a big box vitamin store, there's 3 things that are wrong with them. Number 1, they're not bioavailable. They're not going to be absorbed. They're not a dosage required. They're not bioconverted, which means they have to jump over a gene defect or a metabolic blockade caused by a toxin in the person's body. Ours are, number 1, super bioavailable. They're bioconverted, so they're in their activated form, which basically no other companies have that. Even the medical companies that are out there with doctors. Most of the nutraceuticals out there are pretty darn useless because if you got a gene polymorphism, say for vitamin B6 or B1 or whatever, you can't convert it to its final stage or methylation pathways. And then finally, you need to have it in a dosage high enough to actually have a biological effect. For example, Codex Alimentarius, which is the food rules insanity put together in Europe, actually by a former Nazi in a prison in Holland. He thought this up in the 1960s for some reason to see if they could support the big pharma drug companies. Because big pharma is threatened by it. To be honest with you, if they would be smart, they would actually invest in functional medicine rather than trying to fight it, because they're going to be overcome. As they say, a crossover is what I call nutrapharmaceuticals, because these are more than just nutritionals. For example, if you take herbology with a lot of the different components we have, which go back to Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine and Germanic and medicine, which is the best, if you want to call teaching colleges in functional medicine in the world have been German. Our nutraceuticals in the last, say, 20 years have increased in quality, quantity, and bioavailability and bioconversion even over the ancient nutraceuticals that were given in ancient times. So there's really no comparison. These are really not, even you want to call herbs or even vitamins. I call them nutrapharmaceuticals. They are natural nutritional molecules that are concentrated and bioconverted to a stage which are completely different than the parent compound. So, for example, when you look at things like our gastrozyme and our digestes, these aren't present in nature. When you look at our dosages of Power C Plus, you can't take more than 500 milligrams of natural vitamin C before you get explosive diarrhea. But our Power C Plus, you can take 20, 30 grams, and it won't do a thing to you other than making you healthy and alkaline. When you look at our nutraceuticals that are glandulars, like adrenal support gland with the vitamins and nutraceuticals as well as the glands, and we make sure they're BSE free, or the mitothyroid, etc., you're looking at combination of the activated nutraceuticals and the glandulars together. So, to be honest with you, these didn't exist when I started in practice in 1980, after my residency in family internal medicine. They weren't available. And most of these nutraceuticals have actually only become available in the last, say, 15 years through, again, our NutriMed's development and other doctors around the world working on various projects. For example, our malignant arrest, it was developed by Dr. Sven Georgi, that blocks cancer, and the hexose monophosphate shunt. It's used in 26 countries. I mean, we're not the only ones. We just happen to private label it to that name, but I've combined our other nutraceuticals like Malignant Block, that is a DNA repair apoptogenic agent that'll kill cancer or make it repair itself. Again, remember, the genetics of the cancer are important. So what people need to understand is we're in a whole new realm, and if the pharmaceutical companies were smart, they'd invest more in biotechnology, such as, activating lymphocytes to fight cancer, and nutraceuticals and functional medicine protocols, and training doctors up so that they could get a piece of the action, in other words. We have nutraceuticals, for example, that penetrate to the biofilm, which the big drug companies don't have. They don't have a big thing to knock off, clindamycin-resistant enterococci. We do, Allison Med. They don't have things that will constantly keep down and resurrect your functional activity of your heart and your brain, like Cognition Plus and Brain Power and CoQ10 ubiquinol, and remyelinate your nervous system, like Neurogen and Minerals Plus. They don't have those. So, in other words, there's a lot of things. Most of the things that I recommend are all protocols with technology and nutraceuticals. I never recommend drugs. I can tell them which drugs are maybe safe. For example, in diabetes, there's maybe only 1 in 10 drugs that won't screw you up, won't raise your blood insulin, won't cause new complications. And that's what's really cool about this. The natural molecules don't do that. So pick out a couple that you find are particularly helpful, because, and I like to expand on them. It's like cell detox glutathione. This is one of my favorites. Things like cod liver liquid to lower cholesterol. Head-to-head studies have shown it's as good or better than any statin drug, but no side effects. Statin drugs will demyelinate your brain, damage CoQ10 muscle in your heart and muscles in your cardiovascular system. But cod liver liquid won't, and it supplies also a lot of other important vitamin A, D, E, and K as well, as supporting your lipids. And then we look at Omega Supreme, the highest quality for your fatty acids, APA, DHA, and Omega Supreme Krill. We use, in fact, I gave a recommendation to add this to a protocol for a lady who has Alzheimer's this morning, and we want to reduce the oxidative stress in her brain, but if you're trying to remyelinate neural pathways or heal the hippocampus where their memory's going and she's getting disoriented, we use the things to support cholinergic pathways like Cognition Plus, Brain Power, CDP choline, uridine monophosphate, and especially ultrathiomin B1. But we want to remyelinate, so we use Neurogen, and you need the minerals and Minerals Plus, Vitamineral Max. And if you do that, the brain says, hey, I can heal this. I can actually remyelinate the pathways. So, you don't need to do a T1 weighted MRI scan to look at their neural pathways. You can if you want to you have a big insurance plan, which I don't think anybody has Cadillac insurance anymore. But you can do a quantitative EEG and show these people that their cortex starts to work again if you're on our nutraceuticals. So pick out a couple you find particularly helpful, and we'll expand on those.
Well, I think sticking in that theme of just the brain and thinking clearly is a great one to talk about. So one of the newer formulations in the Nutrimedical line that's just been a smashing success is known as Brain Mag. And so it's a particular form, it's a powder form of magnesium that not only fuels the magnesium levels across the entire body, and it does so using a specialized chelated form that doesn't cause, diarrhea and things like that, and it's uptake not as a mineral but as a protein. It's a very fascinating material. But also part of this component of Brain Mag is a specialized chelated form that goes across the blood-brain barrier. And so what we often think of just taking general magnesium supplements, that certainly it must get, throughout the body. And that's not the case. When they've done studies with various forms of magnesium, the levels in brain tissue, obviously this is animal studies, just doesn't correlate. They can't get it as high without using a particular form that really helps it cross. And so that means if we become deficient over time and many years of living, we could be suffering a lot of deleterious effects of our brains that could, have to do with cognition and memory issues, damage to the actual brain tissue as well, or things like fear extinction, that's what they refer to it in animal studies, but in humans we would often think about that more like PTSD, is you've experienced something that's very traumatic and it's hard for you not to be responding in a negative way and causing the stress and anxiety to your body.
Well, we did that. By the way, we added on the Omega Supreme Krill, and we added Brain Mag, as well as the Ultrathiamine B1 to the protocol for this lady this morning that has in her late 80s, and she has Alzheimer's. And she's getting in an agitated state. There's a thing called sundowning, especially in the evening when they get agitated and they're disoriented because their brain can't focus that they're in the now. So they're confused. Their short-term memory is disrupted, so they really can't focus themselves, but their long-term memory may be at least partially intact. And when you stop that agitation, and we call it non-motor seizure activity in the limbic and hippocampus systems, when you start using Brain Mag, you also reduce the oxidative stress so the brain can start healing itself and restoring neurotransmitters and remyelination. So Brain Mag and Calm Mind combination is amazing. And, I can't tell you how many applications we use for it now, from PTSD to anxiety to sleep induction to correcting depression to autism to dementia to whatever. It's good stuff. Tastes good too. Amazing flavor. I think we provide actually a pretty remarkable service here to people. It's amazing how I get consults from doctors and people all over the world wanting me to help them with their own personal case or cases under them in countries all over the world. And I think we're moving into a new realm of scientific-based functional medicine, which is all-encompassing. It encompasses regular medicine, surgery, toxicology, radiology, herbology, chiropractic, functional medicine, bioplasmatic medicine, radiotoxicology, scalar, biophysics. It includes everything. And the nice thing about it, many of these things, we now have a level of science and testing. We can actually prove it, like the 23andMe and Prometheus to analyze gene SNPs or polymorphisms, organic acid analysis like Dr. William Shaw's lab in Overland Park, Kansas, Great Plains Laboratory, Genova Labs, doctors' data. We're now into a realm where, doctors really need to upgrade their skill sets and understand that this is the medicine of the 21st century. And if they don't catch if you call it like a sail catching the wind, they're going to be lost. And people listening to this program over months and years, they've become pretty expert, especially those that consult our wellness conditions or consult and just email for themselves or their friends their conditions. They're surprised that we can address a lot of conditions that other people say, well, you can't do it. I mentioned the other day I had a health professional in Ontario, Canada, that referred to a lady with hepatitis C, and their doctors told her there's nothing to do to cure you from your hepatitis C or get rid of your viral load. And we put her on her nutraceuticals, Nutriodine, and in a matter of months, she's completely virus-free, and they're scratching their head saying, why? Well, same with when we want to reduce, congestive heart failure. We have our CoQ10 ubiquinol. We have our various forms of carnitine, from IBS Care Slow Release to our VascuCare, which, by the way, is now coming back. We have a lower milligram capsule, but you take more capsules, it's going to be a much better price for the number of caps. And we have the CoQ10, the only non-crystallizing CoQ10 in the world, the CoQ10 ubiquinol, the most bioavailable form of water-soluble CoQ10 for the brain and the heart and blood vessels. And so we can restore mitochondrial function, which is the real cause of hypertension, vascular disease. We can stop oxidative stress. I mean, all the biological parameters that actually drive disease, we can modify now, even diabetes with leptin metabolic, diabetoline, biotin plus, chromium cruciferate, lipoflush to release the fat from the tissues and change brown fat to white fat to brown fat. And the same with our nutraceuticals like forskolin, Coleus forskolii. Curcumin, one of the most powerful, is a major converter of toxic, we call white fat, to brown fat. So we have things now that actually can do things that no drug ever has been able to do. So pick out a couple more that you find particularly helpful, and we'll kind of expand on those.
Well, the leptin metabolic formulation is a fascinating one. when people have been dealing with weight management issues, some of the things that often coincides with that is, one, inflammation. We know the more fat cells that the body gets, the more inflammation and signaling of inflammation that can occur, which is very negative. But number two is also people tend to say, I don't know what's going on, but my body seems to never be satisfied, and there's kind of hunger issues and things like that. That can be a real issue with regards to signaling, cellular signaling that's going on in the body, including what's known as leptin signaling, which should be a signal from fat cells that should trigger in our brain the ability to shut down hunger signaling, knowing that we have enough stored fuel to not always want to crave more food. And that certainly is a missing situation for a lot of individuals where they're one, they feel like they need to eat more food, and two, the body just does not seem to recognize that it's got plenty of stored fuel. And so the leptin metabolic is a fascinating formulation that I think for a lot of individuals that are struggling in the side of weight management, but also inflammatory issues, where the ingredient that's in this product is specifically studied for those with overweight issues, but also had osteoarthritis conditions of the knee. And it's just fascinating what it could do to control the inflammation, but at the same time help the body to become more leptin sensitive. So that's a fascinating thing.
Now, let's look teleologically what it is. Leptin metabolic is a glycosaminoglycan subfraction that's specifically designed to actually feed back through the brain and through the mechanisms that regulate insulin and leptin resistance. And we know that leukotriene B4 actually triggers off increased resistance to leptin, to insulin and leptin, which is a primary trigger for obesity and diabetes. I call it diobesity. Do you like that term, diobesity? Everyone who's overweight, basically, every single person who has a tendency to gain weight or has a dyslipidemia. We have some people that don't get fatter, but their lipids get all screwed up. We also have some people that don't get either fatter or dyslipidemia, but they get very bad osteoarthritis, and it's all tied to elevated insulin resistance. And when you start using leptin metabolic, whether it's osteoarthritis, obesity, or lipid disorders that can predispose to stroke and cardiovascular disease, it's interesting, leptin metabolic has application in all three realms, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Weight loss, obesity, osteoarthritis, and lipid disorders that will cause heart disease. Because if you measure in someone who has lipid disorders, their fasting blood insulin and glucagon and cortisol, you find it's abnormal. Even if they're not fat, somehow their body is compensating, so they're not making a lot of white fat. Other people will get real bad osteoarthritis, and they may only gain a little tiny bit of weight, maybe 5 or 10 pounds, but their main problem is their joints are now getting deformed from osteoarthritis. And it's probably a combination of their specific genetics, epigenetics, and nutrition that they'll go down one or another of these pathways. Some people will just get fat and turn diabetic. Other people will, just become obese, and they're actually say, why did they're not diabetic now? And then we've got a massive amount of weight. So you can see all kinds of different variations on that theme, but the underlying problem is insulin and leptin resistance. Interesting. So leptin metabolic is one of our big three I call diobesity. Leptin metabolic, glycemics, which is our meal replacement. In fact, we talked this morning to one of our ladies who went on the glycemics about a year ago, and she lost 100 pounds. She's from Texas. And she was pretty impressed. She went basically, we call it glycemics fast, which means some days that's all she would take is glycemics. Other days she would have glycemics for breakfast and lunch and have a very light, low glycemic index type of supper. And what she did, took 100 pounds off. I mean, that's pretty darn amazing. And which means...
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. And it works like crazy. I mean, I tell people do what I call glycemics fast. Same with blood pressure. If your blood pressure is off in orbit, you have a high blood insulin. There's no way of getting around it. And high blood insulin means you've lost SOD1 in your vessel walls. You've lost nitric oxide synthase, so your capillaries and your blood vessels can't contract in response to the stress shearing force of the heart contractility. And as a result, your blood isn't moving around, so your heart's pumping against functional resistance. That's what means your blood pressure, systolic and diastolic, are going up. But if you talk to the average doctor who's been taught Guytonian physiology from the 1950s, they're lost. That's disturbing. And I'm a doctor, and I can tell you, as a scientist first and a doctor second, I'm disturbed by the medical profession not moving beyond. I remember my pathology colleagues said, "Oh, you need to go into pathology. You're smart like us." I'm thinking, yes, but all your patients are dead. And they laughed. Yeah, that's true, but we know more than these guys. We're a century ahead of them. I said, my gosh, when's this going to trickle down faster into clinical practice? It's disturbing. The pathologists do know more than anybody, but it doesn't get into clinical practice. It's funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
And now, of course, we have functional medicine, which is like living pathology. Years ago, we had to have always dead people. But functional medicine means we can take somebody's genetics. We can take their organic acids. We can look at the toxicology of their heavy metals and their metabolic byproducts. We can see their immunoglobulins and their cytokine levels in their blood with labs like Immunosciences in Los Angeles. And I can tell you, I can peer into your cells and tell you right down to your DNA. In fact, with the bioplasm, from the Russian Space Agency and the QRMA, I can peer right down to the harmonic frequency of the molecules, right down to individual cells and tissues, and even do a cross-sectional area and tell you right where you have a specific blocked artery or specific pathogen or certain type of cancer in your brain, even from the bioplasm. And if you have a machine, I can log on remotely with TeamViewer 10 and even do the test. You could be anywhere in the world. You can be in Prince Rupert, Canada, or you can be in Vladivostok, Moscow, or Beijing, China. Doesn't matter. Amazing, hey?
Yeah.
So the technology now is like leapfrogging at the light speed ahead. I mean, we're leapfrogging to what I call Star Trek. You know, Bones. That's a good name for a doctor in the future, isn't it? Bones.
Yeah.
So let's talk about one of my other favorites that we haven't talked about in a while is Gamma A+. This is a very important one to get rid of nitro and hydroperoxy radical. If your gamma tocopherols are not working, you're going to fry your arteries. So you need your gamma tocopherols. Gamma A+, 2 soft gels twice a day if you have vascular disease, hypertension, or microcirculatory problems like diabetes, or as they say, diobesity. As I say, there's very few accidents. Most things are on purpose through neglect. Only 1 or 2% of bad things that happen are actually accidents. 98% are neglect causing on purposes, the things that happen. If we know what's wrong, we can fix it. Ryan, we will see you over at the top of the hour break and continue. And and if you have any questions, by the way, any wellness issues, just call into the studio and tell your question to our board op Keith today. We'll be back in just a moment.